The coffee shop was quiet until he stepped in. A black man in a crisp suit, his presence drawing lingering stares that had nothing to do with his FBI badge and everything to do with the color of his skin. He moved toward the counter, calm, methodical, unaware that a storm had already noticed him. The officer's eyes found him immediately. Past 3 white patrons, past the barista cleaning cups, the cop's gaze locked on the man as if he had already spotted a crime. His boots made soft, measured clicks on the tile, but there was no hurry, just quiet, terrifying confidence. "ID," the officer said, voice low, almost casual, but sharp enough to cut through the ambient chatter. No one else in the shop warranted a glance, only him. The supervisor's hand drifted slowly toward his jacket pocket, sliding over the leather wallet inside. A motion meant for proof of identity, but the officer's eyes snapped to the movement as if it were a gun being drawn. Every muscle in the officer's body stiffened. "Step aside," he said, voice cold, measured, with that quiet arrogance that made the law feel like his alone. The patrons froze. A coffee cup rattled against the counter. The barista paused mid-pour, the hiss of the espresso machine slicing through the tension. A faint camera click sounded from a phone on the edge of a table. The officer's head jerked slightly toward it, the corner of his mouth tightening. He had noticed, he hated it. The man's hands remained steady, his breath controlled. Every second stretched, the silence pressing against them like invisible walls, then metal on metal. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed in the silent shop. For the FBI supervisor, the battle for his dignity had just moved from words to steel. The room was silent in the way important rooms always were. A long conference table, frosted glass walls, the faint hum of central air. On one wall, the American flag stood perfectly still, its fabric heavy with symbolism most people never questioned. The FBI supervisor sat at the head of the table. In front of him lay a thick case file, organized, color-coded, methodical. Names, dates, financial trails mapped across states. Months of surveillance condensed into paper and consequence. He flipped the final page. "Confirm jurisdiction," he said calmly, eyes scanning the document. "Yes, sir," a senior agent replied. "Federal authority is clean. Local PD has been notified." A pause. "Notified," he repeated, "not cooperating, not aligned, just notified." He nodded once, absorbing that detail without comment. "Any conflicts?" he asked. One agent hesitated, just long enough to matter. "Nothing official," the agent said carefully, "but some resistance, informal." The supervisor leaned back slightly, folding his hands. His expression didn't change, but the room felt it anyway. He had spent years reading pauses like that. Hesitation was where truth lived. "Document everything," he said. "If it isn't written, it didn't happen." "Yes, sir." He picked up his pen. The signature was steady. No flourish, no hesitation. Just a clean line of ink that activated arrests, subpoenas, and consequences that would ripple through the city. That was the power people never saw, the quiet kind. The kind that didn't need raised voices or visible weapons. Just process. Just authority earned the long way. He closed the file and stood. "Good work," he said. "I'll be back before noon." As he stepped out of the room, his phone vibrated. A message. "Daughter, don't forget my science fair today. I'm nervous." He stopped walking. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Government buildings always did. He smiled just slightly and typed back with his thumb. "I'll be there, front row." 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then, "Daughter, promise." He paused, then typed, "promise." He slipped the phone into his pocket and continued toward the elevator, unaware that this promise was already slipping into danger. An hour later, those same hands were no longer signing anything. They were cuffed. Cold metal pressed into his wrists, not tight enough to hurt, but firm enough to remind him who controlled the moment. The FBI supervisor stood inside the coffee shop, posture straight, shoulders squared, surrounded by a silence that felt louder than shouting. The officer in front of him didn't look angry. That was the worst part. His face was calm, professional, almost bored, like this was routine, like this was normal. The supervisor glanced down briefly, not at the cuffs but at his hands. He had trained agents with those hands, held his daughter's bike steady while she learned to ride, signed documents that changed lives. Now they were treated like evidence. "Turn around," the officer said quietly, not yelled, not threatened. Just stated like a fact that didn't require discussion. "Am I being detained?" the supervisor asked. "Yes." "For what reason?" The officer tilted his head slightly, considering whether the question deserved an answer. His eyes flicked briefly to the people watching, to the phone still pointed in their direction. "You were acting suspicious," he said. "Suspicious." The word hung there, vague and unchallengeable, a container big enough to hold anything. "I was ordering coffee," the supervisor replied. The officer didn't respond. He adjusted his grip on the cuffs instead. Behind them, someone shifted in their seat. A chair scraped softly against the floor. No one spoke. The supervisor felt the familiar calculation begin, the one no training manual ever mentioned. How far could he push? How much resistance would escalate instead of protect? An hour ago, he had been the highest authority in the room. Now he wasn't even considered credible. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. He felt it. The officer noticed. "What's that?" the officer asked. "My phone," the supervisor said. "I have a message. Don't reach for it." "I'm not." The officer stepped closer anyway, lowering his voice. "Hands where I can see them." "They are," he replied calmly. The officer's jaw tightened, not in fear but irritation. Being corrected, even politely, didn't sit well with him. The camera phone clicked again. This time the officer turned sharply toward the sound. "Hey," he said, staring down the person filming. "You might want to mind your business." The implication was clear. The person didn't lower the phone. The officer exhaled through his nose and turned back, annoyance now fully present. Being watched changed things, but not always for the better. The supervisor swallowed. His daughter's message burned in his pocket, unread. Science fair boards, glitter letters. A promise made casually, confidently, because he had believed the world would behave logically. That belief felt naive now. "You're coming with me," the officer said. "Where?" the supervisor asked, for questioning. "Am I under arrest?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He stepped behind him instead and checked the cuffs again. Metal scraped softly. "Yes," he said finally, "you are now." The word now mattered. It meant the decision had just been made, not by law but by perception. As the officer guided him toward the door, the supervisor caught his reflection in the glass, suit still neat, tie still straight, expression controlled. He didn't look like a criminal. That had never mattered before. Outside, a patrol car waited. An hour earlier, he had promised his daughter he'd be there. Now, he wondered how long it would take before anyone believed who he really was, and how much it would cost the city when the truth finally surfaced. The patrol car door shut with a flat, final sound. Not loud, just decisive. The FBI supervisor stood at the curb for half a second longer than necessary, hands cuffed behind him, feeling the weight of eyes pressing into his back. The officer's grip tightened at his elbow, not rough, not aggressive, controlled, possessive. "Watch your step," the officer said. "I am," the supervisor replied. Morning traffic flowed like nothing unusual was happening. Sunlight flashed off windshields. A delivery truck idled. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed. The world had no interest in stopping. Two customers from the coffee shop stood frozen near the door. One held a cup that had gone untouched. A woman across the street lifted her phone halfway, hesitated, then raised it fully. She didn't look brave. She looked careful. The officer opened the rear door of the cruiser. "Sit, for the record," the supervisor said evenly. "I haven't been told what I'm being charged with." The officer leaned in slightly, voice dropping. "For the record," he said, "you should stop talking." That tone again, not anger, ownership. The supervisor met his eyes. "For the record, you're making a mistake." The officer's jaw tightened just a fraction. "Get in the car." He did. The seat was hot. Vinyl clung to fabric. The door slammed, sealing him into a narrow box of scratched plastic and metal. The smell inside was familiar to anyone who'd ever been detained. Disinfectant layered over something older, human, permanent. The engine turned over. As the cruiser pulled away, the coffee shop slid out of view. The barista stood in the doorway, hands clasped together as if in prayer. A man shook his head, not in outrage, just resignation. That hurt more than the cuffs. In the front seat, the officer keyed the radio. "Dispatch Unit 12, one in custody. Copy, charge," a pause, "suspicious behavior." The words landed flat. The supervisor closed his eyes briefly. Suspicious behavior, wide enough to hold anything, empty enough to defend nothing. The cruiser turned hard. His shoulders shifted with emotion. He braced himself, breathing slow, cataloging details the way training demanded. Time, route, badge number, voice patterns. Everything was evidence even now. The radio crackled again. "Unit 12, be advised, there's video online. Detention at a coffee shop, it's spreading." The officer stiffened. "What kind of video?" he asked too fast. "Clear enough, people are commenting." The officer's hands tightened on the steering wheel. In the mirror, his eyes flicked up, meeting the supervisor's gaze for the first time since the arrest. "People should mind their business," the officer muttered. "They are," the supervisor said quietly. "That's exactly what they're doing." The officer turned the radio volume down. The precinct came into view, a low concrete building, narrow windows, flags snapping faintly in the breeze. The cruiser rolled in and stopped. The door opened. Out, the supervisor stepped into the sunlight. Two officers near the entrance looked over. "What do we got?" one asked. "Suspicious individual," the arresting officer replied. The second officer looked him up and down, suit, cuffs, posture. "Doesn't look very suspicious." The arresting officer shot him a warning look. "You want to handle it?" The second officer raised his hands. "Not my stop." Inside, the station buzzed with routine. Phones rang. A printer spat paper. A desk officer glanced up, then quickly backed down. Avoidance had its own rhythm. They stopped near a bench. "Sit." Before he could, a voice cut through. "Hold on." A lieutenant approached, older, grayer, eyes that had seen enough mistakes to recognize one forming. He looked at the cuffs, then the face. "What's going on?" "Suspicious behavior," the officer said. The lieutenant frowned. "Suspicious how?" The officer hesitated. He matched a description. "Description of what?" Silence stretched. The supervisor spoke. "Lieutenant, I'm requesting to know the charge and to make a phone call." The lieutenant studied him. "You a lawyer?" "No." "Then who are you?" The supervisor held his gaze. He could end this now. He knew it. But record mattered. "I'll answer," he said, "after I speak with counsel." The lieutenant nodded once. "Uncuff him. Phone's over there." The officer's face tightened. "Sir, that's an order." The cuffs came off. The supervisor flexed his wrists once. Didn't rub them, didn't show relief. The desk phone rang before he could dial. The lieutenant answered, listened, then looked up sharply. "Yes," he said. "He's here." He covered the receiver. "Your office." The room didn't just go quiet. It went cold. The supervisor took the phone. "Yes," a familiar voice, controlled, urgent. "We're aware," the voice said. "Videos everywhere. Counsel is en route." "Good," he replied. He hung up and turned. The officer stared at him now, not confident, not bored, unsteady. The lieutenant asked slowly, "Who exactly are you?" The supervisor reached into his jacket, slow, deliberate. The officer flinched despite himself, then caught it, embarrassed by his own reaction. The wallet opened. The badge flashed under fluorescent light. The room didn't just go quiet, it went cold. The sound of the officer's career hitting a brick wall was louder than any shout. The officer's face drained of color. He took a step back, then another. "You arrested," the supervisor said evenly. "A black FBI supervisor." The lieutenant swore under his breath. I didn't know," the officer said, voice smaller now. You didn't ask," the supervisor replied. He glanced at his watch. "I'm late," he said quietly. "My daughter has a science fair." That was the moment the damage fully landed. Not policy, not lawsuits, not headlines. Time stolen for no reason. Outside those walls, the video kept spreading. And inside, everyone finally understood. This wasn't over. It had just become expensive. By noon, the video was everywhere. It jumped from one phone to another, then to timelines, then to news desks that recognized a familiar pattern before the names were even confirmed. The clip didn't need context. It had its own language, handcuffs on a man in a suit, a calm voice asking questions, an officer refusing to answer. The silence did the rest. Inside the precinct, the mood curdled. Conversations dropped to whispers. Phones rang and rang again. A sergeant closed a door that was usually left open. The lieutenant who had ordered the cuffs removed stood near his desk, arms folded, eyes fixed on nothing in particular, replaying the last 10 minutes on a loop and wondering which parts would be replayed publicly. The arresting officer sat alone at a metal desk, posture stiff, hands clasped too tightly. He didn't look angry now. He looked exposed. The quiet confidence that had carried him through the morning had evaporated, replaced by a jittery stillness. Every sound made him flinch, the ring of a phone, the scrape of a chair, the soft murmur of a conversation that stopped when he looked up. His supervisor approached without ceremony. "Turn in your weapon," she said. He blinked. "What now?" He hesitated, then complied, placing the firearm on the desk like an object he no longer recognized. The sound it made, metal on metal, felt accusatory. "You're on administrative leave," she continued. "Badge 2, his mouth opened, closed. "This is blown out of proportion," he said weakly. "I was doing my job." She didn't argue. She didn't need to. She slid a printed page across the desk, a screenshot of the video. 3 million views, and climbing. "Internal Affairs will contact you," she said. "Don't make any statements." As she walked away, he noticed something that chilled him more than the reprimand. No one looked sympathetic. Not even the officers who had laughed with him an hour earlier. Distance was forming around him, fast and deliberate. Contagion control. Across town, in a glass-walled conference room high above the street, The city's legal team sat hunched over tablets and laptops. The mood was not outrage, it was arithmetic. Federal supervisor, someone said. On camera. Wrong stop, another replied. Wrong charge. A third voice tighter. Wrong city. The city attorney rubbed his temples. What's the exposure? No one answered immediately. They didn't need to. The numbers were already lining up in their heads. Civil rights violations, unlawful arrest, reputational damage. Add the video. Multiply by timing. Multiply again by history. A junior attorney cleared her throat. There's precedent, she said, and it's not good. The mayor's chief of staff leaned forward. Can we fight it? A pause. Yes, the city attorney said carefully. But we won't win. Silence followed, the kind that acknowledged inevitability. Back at the precinct, the FBI supervisor sat in a small interview room, not detained, not free, waiting. He had declined water. Declined small talk. He sat upright, hands resting on the table, eyes focused on the door. His phone buzzed again. This time he checked it. Dozens of messages, colleagues, friends, numbers he didn't recognize. He scrolled past them all and stopped at one. Daughter, where are you? They're setting up. His throat tightened. He typed slowly. I'm trying, sweetheart, I'm sorry. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. He set the phone face down and closed his eyes, not to escape but to steady himself. Anger would come later. Right now, precision mattered. When counsel arrived, they didn't waste time. This is clean, she said after reviewing the timeline. Too clean, the video, the radio logs, the lack of probable cause, it's all there. He nodded. The officer, panicking, she replied, which helps. Across the city, news vans crowded the curb outside the precinct. Reporters rehearsed lines. Producers whispered into headsets. The headline had already solidified, even as details continued to emerge. Wrongful arrest. Federal supervisor detained. Video sparks outrage. Inside the building, the arresting officer watched a clip on his phone, his own reflection caught in glass as he led the man in cuffs past the counter. He barely recognized himself. The comments scrolled faster than he could read. Fire him. This is why we film. Same story, different city. He turned the phone off, breathing hard, as if the words themselves were running out the air. In the mayor's office, a statement was drafted and redrafted again. We take these matters seriously. An investigation is underway. The city is committed to accountability. Each sentence felt thinner than the last. By late afternoon, the decision was no longer theoretical. We settle, the city attorney said. Quickly. How much? Someone asked. He named the number. No one argued. That evening, the FBI supervisor finally stepped outside. The air felt different, heavier, charged. Cameras pivoted toward him. Questions flew. Sir, how do you feel? Do you think this was racially motivated? Are you filing a lawsuit? He stopped at the top of the steps and turned. I feel tired, he said simply, and I expect accountability. Then he walked away. At home, his daughter's science fair was already over, posters half dismantled, glitter letters drooping. She looked up when he entered, relief and disappointment tangled together. You said you'd be there, she said softly. I know, he replied. I'm sorry, she studied his face, then nodded. Did you do anything wrong? No, he said. I didn't. She accepted that with the simple certainty of someone who trusted him completely. That night, as the city scrambled and the officer sat alone in his apartment, staring at a badge he no longer wore, one truth settled in quietly but firmly. The damage was done. The only question left was how much it would cost and who would finally be forced to pay. The revelation didn't come with sirens or shouting. It arrived the way real consequences always do, quiet, unavoidable, and permanent. The officer sat alone in the interview room now. No radio crackle, no swagger. His shoulders were slumped, his hands folded tightly together, as if he could still hold on to authority by force of habit. Outside the glass, people moved with purpose, phones raised, files opening, careers recalculating in real time. The supervisor stood in the hallway, composed, unreadable. Years of discipline kept his face steady, but inside him there was no victory, only a cold certainty. This was never about humiliation. It was about letting the truth finish its sentence. The lieutenant entered the room without ceremony. He didn't sit. He placed a thick legal pad on the table, turned it around and slid it forward, printed transcripts. Time-stamped dispatch logs, body cam stills frozen at damning angles, civilian CCTV from across the street, wide, merciless, undeniable. The officer looked once, then again, slower. What is this? He asked, even though his voice already knew. This, the lieutenant said evenly, is the full record. Your shift activity, your audio, your footage, and the sworn statement you signed before you knew who you stopped. The officer's jaw tightened. You detained a federal supervisor without cause, the lieutenant continued. You escalated without threat. You ignored protocol. And you falsified your report. A pause. And you lied. That word did the damage, not racist. Not abuse, lied. Across the glass, the supervisor closed his eyes for a brief second, not in relief, but in something closer to grief. Because every page on that table represented a moment where this could have gone differently. The door opened again, internal affairs, city attorneys, risk management. The room filled, but the air thinned. One attorney cleared her throat. We need to discuss exposure, civil damages, federal liability. Federal, the officer whispered. The lieutenant finally met his eyes. You detained the wrong man. No, the officer said quickly. I detained a suspect. The lieutenant didn't raise his voice. You detained a black man buying coffee. The sentence landed like a mirror being forced into place. Down the hall, the supervisor's phone vibrated. Did you leave yet? My volcano still works. He stared at the message longer than he should have, then slid the phone into his pocket. The timing felt almost cruel. When he entered the room, everyone stood, not because they were told to, because recognition had finally caught up. He didn't acknowledge it. He sat, folded his hands, and looked directly at the officer. Do you know why I didn't show my badge? He asked calmly. The officer didn't answer. Because I wanted you to finish, the supervisor said. I wanted the record to be complete, clean, honest. The city attorney shifted in her seat. I've spent my career in rooms where the truth almost makes it, the supervisor continued. Almost, until someone decides it's inconvenient. He leaned forward slightly. This time it isn't. The internal affairs investigator read the findings. Suspension pending termination, referral for federal review. Violations stacked neatly, one after another, with no room left to negotiate reality. The officer's face drained of color, not theatrically now. There was nothing left to perform. What happens to me? He asked. The supervisor answered before anyone else could. Accountability, he said. The part you thought you could outrun. The meeting ended without drama. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Just signatures, timestamps, and futures permanently redirected. In the hallway, the lieutenant stopped the supervisor. I'm sorry, he said quietly. About tonight. The supervisor nodded. My daughter will forgive me. Most people wouldn't have waited, the lieutenant added. I wasn't waiting for him, the supervisor replied. I was waiting for the system to reveal itself. Outside, cameras were already gathering, headlines forming. Officer detains federal supervisor without cause. City faces major settlement. But the real revelation wasn't in the words, it was in the footage. Long, uninterrupted minutes where power was misused because no one thought it mattered. The city didn't just apologize. They paid $5.6 million. A record-breaking settlement for a record-breaking failure of judgment. Press conferences followed, carefully written statements, promises of reform, and the officer. He exited the building through the front doors this time, no badge, no uniform, no protection from the eyes waiting outside. The crowd didn't shout, they didn't need to. Silence was enough. At a red light miles away, the supervisor's phone buzzed again. Did you see it explode? The judges clapped. He smiled just a little. Save me a seat, he typed. I'll watch the video tonight. The light turned green. Behind him, a system struggled to tell the truth it could no longer avoid. Because justice isn't about the badge you wear. It's about the truth you can't outrun. The morning after the settlement, the city felt different. Not quieter, not calmer, just exposed. The streets, the buildings, the courthouse steps all held a new weight. A lesson had been learned, not in private memos, not in whispered reprimands, but in the unflinching glare of cameras, cell phones, and public scrutiny. The supervisor arrived at his office early. The city was still waking, but inside his floor, phones rang nonstop. Messages from colleagues, reports, and media requests stacked on his desk. He moved through them with the ease of someone who had already been through worse. Each call reminded him of the incident. Each question reminded him of the balance between justice and patience. A knock at the door drew his attention. Morning, said his assistant, holding a tablet. Press wants a statement. He looked at her, then at the tablet. The headlines were already rolling. FBI supervisor wrongfully detained, city pays $5.6 million. He didn't smile. Not yet, he had work to do first. Draft a brief statement, he said. Simple, honest, no extra emotion. She nodded. Yes, sir. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. Cars moving, people rushing, oblivious to the details that had dominated the last 24 hours. A coffee shop down the block came into view, the one where it all began. He allowed himself a single thought. If these walls could talk, what stories would they tell? His phone buzzed again. A text from his daughter. Science fair is over. Did you survive the coffee shop apocalypse? He smiled faintly. Yes, and I'm never late again. Later at the press conference, the city's attorney spoke carefully, outlining the settlement. Words like accountability and review hung in the air, but the real story was in the supervisor's quiet presence. No dramatic gestures. No anger, just dignity, the kind that doesn't need an audience to validate it. A reporter asked, "How do you feel about the $5.6 million settlement?" He looked directly at the camera, then beyond it, as if addressing the system itself. "The money is only a small part," he said. "What matters is that accountability is enforced, that we recognize our mistakes and prevent them from happening again." The room held its breath. Not because of anger, not because of triumph, but because the words carried the weight of someone who had seen the machinery of power from the inside and refused to let it crush truth. After the press conference, he returned to his office. Colleagues stopped by, offering congratulations, relief, sometimes awkward silences. The settlement had bought justice, but the supervisor knew something more had changed. A precedent had been set. The system could no longer hide behind uniforms, behind assumptions, behind convenience. He finally sat at his desk, pulled out the folder detailing every aspect of the case, the radio logs, the body cam, the witness statements. He reviewed them once more. Each line confirmed the lesson. Documentation mattered, vigilance mattered, courage mattered. The day stretched on. Calls, meetings, briefings. But even in the middle of the grind, he felt a rare, steady calm. The incident had passed, and what remained was proof of integrity. Before leaving for the day, he glanced at his watch, then at a small photo on his desk, his daughter holding her science fair project, smiling. A volcano erupting in miniature, glittering with imagination and effort. He realized then that small truths, like the one his daughter lived, could ripple outward into the world, challenging bigger systems, bigger failures. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Justice isn't just about the badge you wear, it's about the truth you can't outrun." And with that, he turned off the office lights, stepped into the evening, and walked out into a city that had learned, in its own messy, public way, that power without accountability is fragile, and that dignity, once claimed, can never be erased. The city streets had returned to their usual rhythm, but the memory of what had happened lingered like a faint echo. News vans were gone, press conferences concluded, and social media moved on to the next story. Yet the $5.6 million settlement remained, not just a number on a ledger, but a tangible acknowledgement of error, a record-breaking consequence for a record-breaking failure of judgment. The FBI supervisor walked past the same coffee shop where it all began. The morning sun glinted off the windows, dust motes dancing like tiny witnesses in the beams. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. There was nothing to gawk at anymore. What mattered was already written into the city's conscience. At home, his daughter's science fair poster was still taped to the wall. The volcano she had built stood tall on her shelf, glittering with dried lava. She had won a ribbon, yes, but more importantly, she had learned that effort, patience, and attention to detail could move mountains, or make miniature ones erupt. He smiled quietly, thinking how strangely symbolic it all felt. Truth, like the volcano, could not be contained forever. The former officer left the precinct for the last time, badge surrendered, career shattered. He passed by crowds of curious onlookers, the weight of public judgment pressing harder than any internal memo or reprimand ever could. Silence followed him like a shadow, a reminder that power misused comes at a cost. The supervisor's phone buzzed. A message from his daughter. "Did you see the headline?" He typed back, "Yes, and justice isn't just about the badge you wear. It's about the truth you can't outrun." He put the phone down, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the quiet settle. The city had paid its price, $5.6 million, and the lesson had been etched for anyone willing to watch and learn. Some battles leave scars, others leave clarity, and this one finally left both.